Yeah, welcome in, welcome back, welcome in, welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast and our second ever live episode. So thanks for joining us. Really appreciate that. Real quick, want to say if you're here and on YouTube and you haven't already, please go ahead, click that subscribe, that like, that notification bell. Make sure that you're kept aware of whenever new content drops on the channel. If you want the audio only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in the Format Podcast, and we should come right up. Really appreciate if you're enjoying the content. If you give us that thumbs up, that 5-star review, and leave us a comment. All that stuff helps us grow, helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. So we got a pretty interesting show for you here today. And as you can see, I have a guest with me. I got my guy Tony from the Hoopstorians NBA History Podcast. What's going on, Tony?
Not much, man. Chilling. How you doing?
Doing all right, man. Definitely looking forward to getting into some good basketball conversation here tonight.
Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we did kind of a home and home. You were on mine last night. Now I'm on yours.
Yeah, absolutely, and I definitely enjoyed that. It was a good flavor, and now you're here with me, and so yeah, let's make it happen. So we know that right now the NBA is having, well, they like to frame it as their most efficient offensive season of all time, which I guess statistically is true, but it's also one of the most explosive offensive seasons of all time. A few weeks back, I did a show about it, talking about how I think you had like, what was it? 4 or 5 60-point games in the same week. It was the same week that was the anniversary of Kobe Bryant's 81-point game. And of course, his untimely death, him, Gianna, and 7 others in that helicopter crash in California. But anyway, all that just lends to talking about the way offense is absolutely out of control in the modern NBA. And you saw it, I guess, probably, I don't want to say at its best, but maybe at its worst in this last All-Star game, where, what was it, 211 to 187, the highest scoring game, I guess, in history. No NBA team had ever hit 200 points before. And I get it, it's an all-star game, but that's funny because I actually recently watched, maybe about 3 days ago, the 1987 All-Star game. I watched it on YouTube, and even though that was an all-star game, it resembled a real basketball game, not guys just letting each other, shoot open threes and get open dunks. Like, guys were really competing and trying to win. So even though maybe it wasn't up to the same level of vitriol and physicality and intensity as, an old Eastern Conference playoff game, them guys were still trying to win. And so you look at the modern NBA and you're saying, man, and this is something I've talked about for years and years, how there is so little defense in the modern NBA. And it's really frustrating, especially when you got guys telling me that today the guys are so much better and they're so much more skilled. And I'm like, no, I don't really believe that. So here's an example, right? One thing I always make this example. I say, okay, Tony, in 1995, you run a 100-meter dash and you run it in 10 flat. And Tony now is, he's the fastest 100-meter dash in history, right? 10 flat, 1995. Cool. Bruce comes along in 2005, and Bruce runs a 9.5 and blows Tony's 10 flat out of the water. Bruce is now the fastest man in the history of the world. Fantastic, right? And so here's the thing, okay? I now have the fastest 100 meters in the history of the world, but when Tony ran his 100 meters, he ran his uphill. I ran mine flat. Am I really faster than Tony? I don't think so. And I say that to say what it is this. When you start looking at degree of difficulty, it has to matter. And so the NBA literally changing the rules to favor offense, and this is not my opinion, and I'm going to back that up in a minute, has to play into all of what we're seeing in terms of the scoring and the explosive offense and all of that, and all of these things that we're seeing in which people are going to say that today's players are so much better. So check this out. This is Stu Jackson, former executive vice president of basketball operations in the NBA. Quote, with rule and interpretation changes, it has become more difficult for defenders to defend penetration, cover the entire floor on defensive rotations, and recover to shooters. This has provided more time for shooters to ready themselves for quality shots. With more dribble penetration, ball handlers are getting more opportunities at the rim, unquote. Here's Rod Thorne, former NBA Vice President of Basketball Operations. Quote, we want to make it a more free-flowing, fluid, wide-open game, unquote. Okay, so also Stu Jackson. According to Stu Jackson, the new rules, and these were the rules that were changed around 2004, 2005, they discourage bigger players from staying in the middle of the lane and preventing passing player movement and therefore improving shooting percentage close to the basket. Okay, now here's another one. So we heard constantly that the reason Michael Jordan was able to score so much is because he didn't have to score against the zone. So that made it easier. Okay, cool. That's what you want to hang your hat on, LeBron people? I got you. Check it out. So here's an unnamed source from the NBA office. Quote, rather than impede the game, zone defense arguably has helped foster the offensive renaissance by giving teams more incentive to score on fast breaks. The rules have stretched the defenses to the limit and reward the offense with fast break and three-point shooting opportunities by eliminating defensive contacts, unquote. So the reason that I brought up all those quotes was to say that it's nonsensical to sit here and try to tell me today's players are so much better when they're literally playing under conditions that were formulated to allow them to do what they're doing. Now, do they have to make the shots? Absolutely. Do they have to hone their skills? Absolutely. But it's a lot easier to do it when the defense is handicapped. Let's go ahead and get into your thoughts on this, Tony.
Well, I did want to bring this up. So back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, it used to be a travel unless you put your hand had to be at the top of the ball. On the side, anything like that was travel. You had to be at top of the ball.
Carry,
so
right? Carry, right?
Well, yeah, especially because if you put it under, it's called palming, and that's when they hit you with the palming, they just never call it anymore. So
that's true too. I didn't even get into that.
Yeah, that's the Allen Iverson rule. So what I'm saying is when you see the factor and you see old players dribbling, well, they were only allowed to dribble like this. Okay, now I'm not saying they're not better dribblers or anything like that, but I'm saying you have to factor in the rules. There's a big clip, right? There's a clip of Dominique in the 80s doing the Euro step, being called for a travel.
David Robinson too.
Right. So so you got to factor in there's different rules now to make the offensive player better. I have a cool stat about that, actually, and I was going to bring this up last night, but we didn't get to it. Did you know last year's Kings were on pace for 118.6 points per 100 possessions? That was the highest ever.
That's crazy.
That was the highest ever per 100. This year, 5 teams are beating them. You got the Celtics at 122.2, Pacers at 121, Thunder at 120.5, Bucks at 119.9, and the Clippers at 119.8. Then you have the Hawks, Mavs, Sixers, Suns, Warriors, Nuggets, Knicks, Pelicans, all within a point. So it obviously, just on the numbers alone, obviously it's an upward trend, and there is a reason why that is. And because, like I said, we have rules now, and we have, it used to be in the 90s. We talked about this recently too, like the Spurs dominance. Do you know the Spurs in the 99 playoffs, they held teams in the 60s more than they scored 100? There's only one team scored 100 that entire playoff run for them, and that was the Lakers, and it was 107. It was the night they got swept. So the defense had gotten too good at that point in time, and the ratings were low because at the end of the day, offense sells. Nobody take a look at football. Nobody wants a 3-0 defensive stalemate. They want a 42 to 38, back and forth barn burner. That's what they want. Well, same thing in the NBA. But now we've gotten to the point where we're too focused on offense, and it looks like, it's not nearly as fun.
It's a video game.
Yeah, because if you would have took me and said there's going to be a 211 to 186 game, I'm in theory, but then not watching anybody compete because it wasn't even a game. It was a shoot around. That's what the game was. It was a shoot around. It was a nonstop shoot around. Looked like they were warming up. So those are some of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. To your point about those 99 Spurs and how great they were defensively, we can also look at the 04 Pistons, who I believe held 13 straight opponents under 70. Now that is defense. Now, again, that's probably not the most exciting for the layman, right? You're trying to grow the game. You need some excitement. And so what we had the 80s were a pretty fast decade. A big part of that was the Denver Nuggets in the West and the Showtime Lakers in the West. But then towards the end of that decade, with the bad boy Pistons and them being an elite defensive team, and then you moved into the 90s, you had the Knicks playing bully ball, you had the Bulls being a lockdown defensive team, you had the Rockets being great defensive teams, winning championships, and so on and so forth. And so things totally changed, right? But we remember, I think most of us who are into basketball kind of remember the was it the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns in 2006?
Point real quick though.
Yeah.
I don't know if you even remember the Mike Fratello Cavs of the
Absolutely,
early and mid-90s.
Yeah.
They used up 23 seconds of the 20 every possession.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Mark Price was great, but that's another that's a guy who would kill today. But anyway, totally different argument. Anyway, yeah, so we kind of remember the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns, Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, Mike D'Antoni as the team that ushered in the explosive, fast-paced offense. And this is crazy. I was doing research for this show and I found it. That team averaged 110.4 points per game, which at that time was one of the highest ever and 7 points higher than the next closest team. Cool. That would rank 28th in scoring in today's NBA. Like, it's ridiculous what we are seeing in terms of lack of defense. And it's funny because prior to the All-Star game, we heard Adam Silver talking about guys who were going to compete and it was going to be a better game and so on and so forth. And then if you remember, I think after the East won and he was handing out the trophy and the All-Star MVP and all that, he looked so disgusted and he's like, well, you scored the most points, so I guess you won. And he looked utterly disgusted. But how are you going to be disgusted when you are the main ones you're one of the main ones that's, all about this thing? Because if you remember, I think it was late last year, he was on Kevin Garnett's podcast.
Is the high scoring working? Is speeding the game up? I asked this with a follow-up because I want to know, will there ever be a time in our lives where the hand check comes back? Is that going? Is this kind of the wave in which we're going now?
I'll answer it coming from the fan in me, which is, and maybe data comes into play here because I can look at television ratings and other measures of interest. There was a point, I believe, probably in around the late 90s when the game became too physical. And I think we lost some of
For our viewers, you mean?
Yeah, and I think for our fans, from the aesthetic enjoyment of the game, where it de-emphasized the particular skill a player had and maybe weighted too heavily physicality, where a big, strong player could come in and prevent a incredibly skilled player from doing those kinds of things. I think of, not that he's a small guy, but a smaller player like Steph Curry can do on the floor. I think that when you think of some of his ability to shoot, his ability to move through the paint, that if guys could just bang him and knock him to the ground, as that was once the case in the league, I don't think that would be a better brand of basketball. I also think we have to find the right balance, because I know when I sit in the stands or talk to friends sometime, they want to bring back, and we've tried to bring back a little bit more of the physicality. Like, I think people like to see hard defense. I mean, it goes a little bit before to what you and I are talking about, like touch and feel. Like, I don't think either people like that idea that guys can go through unscathed and you're protecting your star players. And in fact, we made some changes this season where sort of, I don't know, the unnatural basketball moves, you know what I'm referring to, and where those were being, players were gaming the system in a way.
Catching on.
Brilliant players playing by the rules had found ways where those were becoming defensive fouls. So we reset this year, which is something you got to do in the offseason. You don't want to change mid-course, but we made it clear, those players, that that's no longer going to be a foul. And of course, because they're the greatest players, they adjust and they find other ways to score.
I think it was super frustrating for him to kind of see what he and David Stern had envisioned as a global game, a fast-paced game, an exciting game for the fans, come back and turn around to bite them in the butt with what we have now, which often seems like a non-competitive product, at least until the playoffs. I have, in fairness, noted that over the last couple of years, the playoffs have looked more physical. I mean, it'll never go back to the 90s, but more physical and more defensive-oriented. And I'm going to get to that in a second, but what we're seeing is just in the regular season, for the most part, games that are 3-point shooting contests, and that's just not basketball. So what are your thoughts on maybe some things that could be done to try and, I'm not, again, saying that we can take it back to the 90s, but kind of try to slow things down and create, as the NBA guys say, Joe Dumars and Adam Silver, a little more balance?
Well, a couple different things on it is, one is eliminate the defensive 3 seconds. When you
That's
play
where I
zone,
was going. Absolutely.
right, so we can eliminate that. We can bring back hand checking, and then
They're never going to do that.
yeah. Let's see what happens. Maybe it could be like when they brought the synthetic ball and it didn't work out after a month or so. Maybe they can switch it up if it doesn't, work out or anything like that. But those would be some things I would like to see. I would also like for the hunting for foul calls. If I'm moving and you're moving, but you're colliding in my space, even though I'm not standing still, that shouldn't be a foul on me. That should be just a foul on you. You're the one colliding into me. I have a right to be here. So those could be some of the things that's doing it. I think that we have to listen to the fans more. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of fans are growing with the collective. I hate the current league. I hate the defense and all that. And part of it is I think they've also made the league with catering more to the offensive player and the big name player. They've made the league, for lack of a better term, a bunch of spoiled brats. It's all about them. It's no longer about the fans. It's about what's best for the player. Think of it like this. If you went into Walmart and we were going to do everything that was best for the cashier, would you continue to shop there? And that's the same thing. So you have to cater it more to the fans. And the fans look at it like this. I go out, I make $20 an hour and I work construction and I'm busting my ass, sweating off, in the elements. And you got a guy at 50 million making a year complaining that he's being called Westbrick instead of Westbrook.
Yeah,
if I was making 50 million, I could handle name call.
You call me whatever for that money.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. I had a sports sociologist on my show not too long ago. We were talking about things like this. So breaking it down from the sociology aspects of it. And I think that's what we have to do with it too. We have to make it more fan friendly, and the fans want more defense right now. They want more. Really, it's not even about defense. They want a more competitive game. It doesn't even matter if you're not playing defense. It's the competitive spirit there. Are you trying? Are you trying to play defense? That's all that really matters. You have your boy LeBron right now. He doesn't even play defense, and then glares at other people when they don't do their defensive rotation. Well, bro, I was covering your slack. I don't even care that he does that to stay on the court. But don't try to blame someone else because when you're not playing D.
Well, he's been blaming other people for his mistakes for his entire career, but we're not going to get into that. That's kind of what he does. But no, I totally get it. So Eugene Genius in the chat, shout out G. He says just call traveling. So I agree with that, but here's a big problem. We're going to have a whistle every 3 seconds if we start calling every travel, if we call every carry, if we call every double dribble. We are going to have a ton because these guys are growing up now thinking that it's okay to play that way with this 0 step and this gather step and, taking 3 steps on the side step back 3 and all this stuff. Like that. They say that Kyrie Irving has the best handle in NBA history, and his handle is incredible, no doubt. But I can't agree with that. You can't be the best if so much of what you do is based on a violation. I can't agree with that. So that's problematic for me. But I definitely like your suggestion to do away with the defensive 3 second, because what that does is it brings back shot blockers into the paint. So you don't get so many just easy layups and dunks like it's nothing. So that's a big one, because you look at it. Wembanyama is averaging 3.5 blocks per game as a rookie, but he's not like in the paint like a traditional shot blocker. It's because of his incredible length that he's able to recover after showing on a pick and roll or switching and still, get there to get the block. So that's atypical. You're not going to have too many guys, right? Rudy Gobert, think about the type of shot blocker he could be if there was no defensive 3 second rule. He would probably get 4 blocks a game. And so I think that's a big one. I don't think, to your point, that I don't think they'll ever bring back the hand checking rule because they just don't want a defender to be able to move an offensive player around. But I think they need to do away with this concept of all those away from the ball fouls to allow for freedom of movement and free flowing and all that. Like, it's basically just allowing the offensive player to go wherever they want on the floor and do whatever they want. It's like, you have to allow the defense to do something. And that's kind of my thought on it. You got to allow the defense to do something.
Well, I was going to say this about a couple of things is back when I want you to think about back when you were in high school or whatever, you probably
Okay.
really wanted a 40-inch vertical.
I did.
Right,
Never
right,
had
right.
one.
And now it's not about the 40-inch vertical. It's about who's got the 40-inch step back. That's where the game
Yeah.
has changed. I have
Mhm.
another way of doing it. And how much cussing can we do on here?
I try not to. I try to keep it clean because if somebody's riding around in the car with their kid, I don't want them
Right.
to have to change the channel.
Well, basically, okay, so I'll change the word. Okay, so basically, what I would do is all these people that are hunting for fouls and often fouls, and
Mhm.
trying to search for fouls, and then complain when they don't. Like Luka Doncic, he complains after every call, complains after every play, every. So
Yep.
what I would do is, if I was the ref, and I'd be like, "Hey, bro, check this out. If you need sissy calls to make it, go up on the podium, tell everybody you're a sissy, and then I will give you sissy calls, or you can get man calls. You either gonna be a sissy or a man."
Right.
You
Right.
can't beg for sissy calls and then claim how tough and how hard you are.
Mhm.
Nothing worse than you complaining
Right.
about not getting any calls and then flex it.
And then
on
flexing when you
someone.
get an and
Right.
one, right?
Right,
with
right,
the
right.
mean
There's
face.
nothing worse
Yeah.
than that. So go on the podium, admit
Mhm.
you're a sissy, and we'll give you sissy calls. I think that could be a way to fix it. We're only giving players sissy calls that admit
If
they're a
they'll admit
sissy.
it.
And that's not the word I would use.
Yeah, no,
I
I
would
get
make
it.
them
I
use a
get it.
different word. But
I
but
get it.
that, I
That's
think
funny.
that could fix it.
Yeah, I saw the other day. There was a play, I can't remember what the game was, but they basically barreled into LeBron, put their forearm in his chest, ran him over, and went and scored. And he was irate with the referee, like, "Where's the call?" And I'm like, "You've been doing this your entire career, bro. What are you? And now you're looking for this call? Get out of here, man." But
Well, there's
you
that
know.
one sound bite with him where he's telling PJ Tucker, "You're too big to be flopping." Well, you're bigger than him.
Yeah, come on, man. I actually I put together a montage of LeBron and his ridiculous flops. I mean, and it's so absurd. And then he actually looked at the camera at one point and winked after he did it. Like, come on, man. But it is what it is. He's been getting away with it, so he's going to continue to do so. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the change in the league and the defense and what should be done. Now, at the end of the day, I think very little will be done. So they're very careful, the NBA, how they're wording it. They're not saying that they need more defense. They're not saying they need to slow down the offense. They're saying they have the competition committee looking at it to, if necessary, create more balance. So that is what that is.